morning, everybody. It is so wonderful to see a room full of people. You are right.
It's crowded, standing room only.
And thank you so much.
Let's hope the Disney fire marshal's not around. He's been the Maytag repairman, I guess, so hopefully doesn't get aggressive.
And thank you so much to you and Patricia for your hospitality. It's been 14 years, I think, since this conference has been held in Florida. So I want to get to Excel and Ed's goals in a couple minutes, but I want to start by having you just talk a little bit about the Florida education reform experiment that you launched over 2 decades ago. And one of the things I'm excited about is there are a lot of new friends in the room today. So tell us about how you got started and decided I'm going to be the education governor.
There was a group called Floridians for Educational Choice. Tom Feeney, myself, a woman named Billy Neese created this. We had like 15 people. And we said, you know, I was pretty radical back then, and I still believe this, that parents ought to decide where their kids go to school, public or private, doesn't matter. So we called for the voucherization of the entire school system in 1993. And I remember we brought down Polly Williams, who was the representative that passed the Milwaukee voucher law with Tommy Thompson's support. And we began this journey, and that kind of morphed into working with John Hage, who's now runs a highly successful charter management organization, to help the legislature pass the first charter law. And T. Willard Fair, who's the longest serving member of an urban league in the United States, and I formed the first charter school in Miami. And you do all these things and you realize, man, there's a lot of resistance to what you think are pretty righteous ideas. I have to admit that not all my ideas are great, but they're always righteous at least, and you think people will embrace them, and man, they don't. I mean, there's a fight to the finish when you want to change a system, and so we learned a lot. And then as a candidate in '98, I went to visit 250 schools, and you got to hit them. You got to go like 3 or 4 a day, because remember, summertime, they're not open. So I actually went to 260 schools, and I saw what my brother has called the soft bigotry of low expectation. Every time I went into these schools, and it wasn't because there were dedicated teachers, there were people in these systems that were doing their best, but the system itself was flawed, I think. And Florida was 50th out of 50 states in graduation rate. 50% of our kids with low standards and low expectations were graduating from high school in 1997. So it just invigorated me to be a little bit bigger and a little bit bolder. I stole some ideas from North Carolina and stole some ideas from Texas. My older brother did some initial things. Jim Hunt in North Carolina with Republican support began the journey on accountability, and we put it on steroids. And I proposed it in the campaign. And it was supposed to be a horrible thing to do. My God, don't say all the things you want to do, because it's going to be controversial. And it became the #1 issue in the campaign. I ran against the incumbent lieutenant governor, and my ideas were the dominant feature of the campaign. And I think we need to get back to that, by the way. In politics, don't always tear down your opponent. Advocate ideas and defend them. So lo and behold, I won. And I claimed a mandate. Whether I had one or not, you have the right to claim it, right? And,
absolutely.
And that kind of got everybody's interest aligned to implement the idea in the campaign, which is the A+ plan. And Patricia, much younger back then, like I was basically drafted the bills that became the A+ plan, that became the accountability plan and the school choice plans that all started in 1999. The speaker and the president I think they felt like this guy is a little crazy, but he can't screw up because he's the first Republican with a Republican legislature, so we're going to have to tolerate some of his craziness. And they were very, very loyal and improved the ideas. And then we worked like crazy to implement them. I mean, because the first NAEP tests that came out, the NAEP scores that came out like 3 or 4 years later, I was praying the rosary like nobody's business, because if they had not seen the gains, people say, why are you doing this? And in fact, we had lights out gains. Just from the bottom of the pack, particularly for low-income kids with learning disabilities, black students, Hispanic students, we were in the top 5 from being really literally in the bottom. So in a 5-year period, we saw these kind of gains, and that sustained the momentum. I mean, clearly, policy works when it works. I mean, policy is popular when it works. And you have to make sure that you have successes that you can then build on.
Governor, I think every single person in this room can feel that this is not political for you, it's personal. Your conviction and some of the rhetoric you used in your opening remarks about how you feel about the challenges in this moment, I mean, it is deep. So I want to push you a little bit more to expand on, before we get to the hopeful part of the conversation, how did you experience these last 18 months as you looked out at the strain on communities, families, and children?
Yeah, well, first of all, personally, I flourished, which made it even worse, if you think about it. I mean, I have a blessed life. I got to sleep with my wife every night for more than a year. I never had, we've been married 47 years. I was always on the road. And I actually like sleeping with my wife, and she apparently likes that, sleeping with me.
We'll do a round of applause for that.
For all the dirty minds out there, I mean...
I didn't take it that way.
Gee whiz, this is supposed to be a different kind of crowd. Anyway, my business flourished. I was connected with the things that I cared about. My health was, I worked out twice a day, and I was more productive. And so, on the one hand, and I think a lot of people experienced that. They saw this. And on the other hand, you see the country being torn apart and everything being politicized. It just was heartbreaking. And then you see the people that had no access to any education. I think, what was the number? 40% of students in the Los Angeles school district, second largest school district, they didn't know where they were. I mean,
missing.
And no one's marching in the streets. No one is saying, wait a second, this is outrageous. No one thinks about how the suffering that will take place over the long run because of that. At least I didn't feel like people were all upset about that. And so I got more upset. And so I'm glad we're out in the open, back interacting again so I can, get therapy and stop yelling at the television. And on the good news side, I think a lot of people felt that in state legislatures and governors and policymakers, because this last year has been the most extraordinary year all across the country in passing meaningful changes to open up our system and empower parents. So the egregious examples of shutting parents out was countered with meaningful legislation that I think will be long-lasting and very positive. So I think as we get out of this, we're poised to see tremendous possibilities.
Let's talk a little bit more about this window of opportunity, because as you said, it was a remarkable year in a lot of ways. And actually, I think the therapy for everybody in this room was all of the ingenuity on the part of families who were starting learning pods, advocates who are working with legislators and coming up with new policy ideas. So what is this moment presenting in terms of the agenda that we all need to be thinking about going forward?
Yeah, I think one thing that's clear is the illiberalism, and it's on both sides of the political spectrum, is being rejected by most people. I mean, and that's exciting, but we can't just focus, exclusively on those, on that effort of trying to narrow speech that is real in our country, and it's dangerous. But we should take advantage of this opportunity to say, let's create an agenda for parents that is much more positive, to give them the tools that they want to be able to make sure their kids are successful. Let's give them more options. Let's break down the system to unbundle and rebundle so that parents can have many more choices than just the three traditional public, private, or charter. And I think that's the challenge for us, is to take this energy of people rejecting the notion that America's a horrible place that has no hope. That is just not true. The progress, people look back on the Civil War, for example, and I promise you, I'm not going to talk about this long. They look back on the Civil War and they use the lens of today, and they say, what a horrible thing, and therefore somehow it still exists today. It doesn't. We've made enormous progress, but the gaps that exist, the challenges that exist are real, and we can solve them. The digital divide, Romy, is a solvable problem, and particularly when you have $40 billion that's teed up. Philanthropy, state and local governments, school districts, individuals, all sorts of people now can be engaged to never again shut people out. And imagine, instead of just not shutting them out, to use the learning, the ability to have high-speed broadband in the home and devices to actually enhance the learning for traditional classroom education as well. We have these big opportunities now, and I think people's eyes are open, and they're motivated to have a bias towards action, rather than sitting in the corner with sucking their thumb and all worried about what the future looks like.
Governor, on the digital divide issue, it's been a very bipartisan coalition that has been working together to incredible effect. Did you learn anything about the kind of coalition we need in our work to advance some of our goals from that work or other work that you've done?
Well, I mean, this is clearly, there's a couple of places in ed policy where there's not a big food fight. I would say career pathway efforts, there's emerging bipartisanship there. The system, the people that oppose changing how we focus on career education are those that are, defending a system that was broken 25, 30 years ago, and it's broken even more now. I mean, they need to move towards where the puck is, which is a totally customized experience for jobs that exist today that, didn't exist 25 years ago. So I think there's real consensus there, and certainly on the high-speed broadband issue, there is big momentum left and right. And we can have, civil discourse, and we can argue. Today or tomorrow, Amanda Ripley's going to speak about high conflict. Conflict itself is actually, it's healthy. It's how you find common ground. You have a dialogue where your views are heard and you're respectful of other people's views. That's great. And so we'll have that chance on parental choice or other issues. But on the issues where there is consensus, I think we seize the moment. I'm too old school, I guess, but I don't know why we have to fight about things we agree on. There's a lot to fight on that we don't agree on. Save that for that.
I think that's true, and also, it's a highly polarized moment. I'm wondering, just because so many people in this room consider you to be a mentor, can you tell us about a time where you changed your view or adapted your view to reach consensus? Yeah,
no, I did it. I did it as a candidate between 94 and 98. I mean, I was a fiery dude in 94. And I was one of the only Republicans that lost in 94. I think the guy that ran against Ted Kennedy and a Senate candidate in California and me losing to Lawton Childs were the only Republicans that didn't win. So just a quick aside for the politicians in the crowd, the key to a successful campaign is to run against a bad candidate, not a good one. And Lawton Childs never lost an election, and I certainly didn't change that fact. So it made me pause and say, how do I put a human context around this rather than spew out data? How do you put it in a human context? How do you connect with people on a human level first? How do you show your heart first? Then you can, unleash the 5-point plan. That lesson, I think, is really helpful because this is really important stuff for people, and they don't want it to be ideological or hyper-partisan. They don't want to. It's not about tearing someone down. It's about giving people hope. And so that lesson was hard for me. I mean, I like winning rather than losing. But it gave me losing 94 was a way for me to open up my mind to a different mindset, how to approach this, and it was really helpful.
I want to pivot to some of the goals that Excel in Ed has. You talked about 5 goals, and you and I were brainstorming about ideas backstage. You've got a lot of them. So let's start with closing learning gaps. We know that is an enormous issue right now, and we don't even understand the full extent of learning loss. Why is that a priority, and what are some of the tactical ideas you all are advancing?
Well, I think the number one issue as it relates to the learning gaps is to focus on a pre-K to 3 strategy to make sure that teachers know how to teach children how to learn to read. Our schools of education, I don't think, cut it, and they need to. We need to be able to assess where children are, and we need to put more resources in these places where these gaps exist, because if you're functionally illiterate, and sadly, about a third of all kids are, and we ignore it because we basically everybody's above average. We just cover this stuff up. Those gaps begin to grow and grow and grow, And I think the Florida story, the Mississippi story, there are places now where we can point to and say, if you are intensely focused on this, you can narrow the achievement gap at the early age, which makes it more likely that that gap won't grow going forward. But I think we open up our system and allow people to get involved. We had 200,000 mentors, most of whom were in schools, most of whom were in lower performing elementary schools, most of whom were mentoring struggling third grade readers. And the districts opposed that in a lot of places. Some openly embraced it, but when we finally kind of broke the door down and allowed volunteers to come in, teachers loved it. And we had great success, and I think that was part of it. This should be beyond a system challenge. This ought to be a national calling, implemented community by community. A great country like ours should not have these gaps that exist. And there's tools now that we can use, technology tools and others, to be able to create a strategy. But it has to be an open, public, I'm going to do this, here's follow me kind of deal. And right now our politics is really mired on, except for the governors, I would say, in the states, which gives me hope. Most of our politics that we see on TV, at least, is tearing someone down to make yourself owning the libs or owning the conservatives. Winning MSNBC or winning Fox is a bigger priority than actually creating a strategy to make sure that we obliterate social promotion policy.
Is this an area where you think some of the federal COVID relief dollars, the ARP money, can be put to good use in sustainable ways?
Yes. The problem is the cliff issue. I've talked to a few people yesterday about this. I mean, I don't know if the feds will allow this, but when we had the tobacco settlement dollars, Florida got the biggest slug of anybody, because I think we were the first to, beat the tobacco companies. It's billions of dollars. We created the Lawton Childs endowment. It was a good way to get bipartisan support, by the way. Name it after the guy who got the lawsuit done and who had just passed away. And so we took one-time monies and we created an endowment for long-term spending, based on the income that was earned off of that endowment. I mean, I think there's things that we could do with this money. It's way too much money. I mean, this is ridiculous. It's not going to be possible for you guys to spend this money at the pace that apparently you're supposed to be spending it at. If it's possible to create one-time monies to be spent on long-term things that are really important, and this would be one place where that would be really helpful. The other place I would say is there's real inequities in capital outlay dollars. Traditional public schools, want to keep every possible dollar that they have. I don't blame them, but schools are schools. It's not a question of whether they're traditional public or charter or private. I think we ought to have capital outlay dollars for all sources of education. We're passing these laws. West Virginia has a universal ESA law. God bless them for doing it, but how are they going to create Yeah, go for it. No other state was as bold as that, but how are you going to build the capacity without having the capital outlay to make it happen? And so that's a perfect place to use one-time monies to be spent over the long haul, and you could match it with philanthropy. I'm sure the Walton Foundation would be interested in something like that.
He always has ideas, right? Let's go to career pathways, because that's one that a lot of people in this room are focused on. We're very focused on it at the Walton Family Foundation, thinking about this continuum from K-12 to employment. And it also is an issue where there's a lot of bipartisan collaboration and also bringing employers to the table. So what are some of the ideas that you all are helping policymakers think about when it comes to setting students up for success beyond high school?
Well, first of all, you can embed these things in your accountability system. First of all, you got to have an accountability system, yep, which there's a big effort now to destroy. But if you embed career pathway activities in the high school accountability system, you're going to get more of what you want. The lessons learned in places that have done this, if you have a nationally recognized credential and you get bonus points for having students pass that test, you're going to get a lot more of them. We went from 3% to 38% in Florida when the legislature changed our accountability laws to include that. Now the question is, can you make it higher quality? And so states need to create databases that can actually show where the jobs are There's ways to go basically from K-12 all the way to the workforce to know where the shortages are for jobs, where the wages are, and how do you craft creative ways to deal with the gaps that exist. And technology now can play a really constructive role. So these are broad-based strategies. Our foundation, I can promise you, anybody calls and says, if you haven't called us already, I'm proud of the fact that I would say we are the subject matter experts on how to pass, how to create the legislation that would accelerate the career pathway movement. And again, it's nice to be in a few places where there's not like people throwing food at each other.
And this is an issue that parents are saying more and more, is that career-connected learning matters to a child being future ready. And I want to talk about what we're hearing from families in this moment. We've got some amazing family and parent organizers in the room. Bernita Bradley is here, Kelly Bolar-Williams, and just an amazing community in our work of people who are supporting families in taking a next step and a different step. And what the data shows is that families more than ever before are saying they want to see education reimagined. You mentioned this in your opening remarks. So talk a little bit about what that means, both in terms of school choice and some of the other issues that you are hearing from families that are priorities.
Well, this is a huge issue. And I think, are you going to share your data at the conference?
I think everybody in this room is welcome to see our data. We've done a ton of polling. I also want to shout out EdChoice and the National Parents Union. Their polling of what families are saying are priorities has been absolutely pivotal, I think, to all of us in the work in shaping what we're focused on. And this idea of reimagining education has come up time and time again. And some of it is that parents got this crazy up close and personal view of what an education looks like, how a teacher teaches, in ways that they just didn't have that kind of proximity until the pandemic happened. And your kitchen table was where you ate your meals, did your homework, and did your entire school day. So we're hearing parents make different choices.
So I think the key step, first of all, having that information, and we'll make sure everybody gets it, is really important. The other thing that we've learned is that parents have embraced accountability like nobody's business. They want their schools to be held to account. The idea that is perpetrated, again, on the more extreme side of the left and the right, is that we can't test, we can't assess, there should be no accountability, it's not fair, whatever. It is bogus. I mean, these are 80% numbers. And strongly supportive of accountability. So I think that some of the elite policymakers are really out of step with what parents are feeling, and it creates this big opportunity. I think the key is to unbundle this, to think about education as the parent is in charge of their child's education, and it should be customized to their needs, because every child is different, and the learning experience of the last 2 years just heightens that. So if you can get a course that isn't found in the school that your child was going to, you can get it online. Why not be able to create a funding system that allows for that to take place? Or if you want to have learning in a pod format because you found that experience was actually what you really like. It wasn't just an emergency, but you want to move forward like that. But teachers don't have a place. They're kind of orphans in this system when they try to teach in a pod setting. So maybe there's another place where you change the law to allow for teachers to maintain their benefits, maybe be licensed at the state level, not the district level, and expand the number of choices. Another great place for CARES Act money and all this other money that's going to be just driven down the throats of everybody in the state level is to enhance this, create this infrastructure that can be built out, and I think it would be sustainable. So we're living in a really diverse country. Parents are diverse. They have different aspirations for their kids. They want accountability for sure, but they want access to a 21st century offering that doesn't exist in a lot of places. So this is a big time opportunity for policymakers across the country.
Can we just brainstorm on the accountability issue for a moment? Because it's a hard message for lawmakers to carry. And you're right, what parents are saying is, we need tests. We may not like the current ones, but we want different and better. So when you think about carrying that message, what comes to mind as like a compelling way to talk about this that cuts through some of the noise that you're talking about, which is people on both sides saying, no tests, we don't need the tests for whatever reason?
Yeah, I think I have a running battle with I love the psychometrician that works in the foundation. She's the smartest person I know, Christy, so don't take offense. But I think psychometricians kind of dominate this field, and they're not willing to, they're a little too rigid, I think. I think there's got to be a more forward-leaning look at how we can assess accurately where it's not traumatic, where it doesn't take forever, where it's done closer to the end of the school year, where parents can easily understand what the implications of the tests are. We have artificial intelligence for everything. Most of the things that we interact with right now, you think it's a person. No. It's some bot somewhere designed in some place because they know, there's patterns that they can identify and they respond to this. Well, you could create a easy process to be able to give parents tools to help during the summer to be able to deal with what, tests should have the power of accountability, but they also should have the power of identifying the challenges that students have. And now parents are used to being, teachers of their kids. And if you give them the tools to do it, I think you can deal with a lot of challenges. And teachers for the next year ought to have that same information. So fewer tests, better tests is the answer. But to eliminate testing and then therefore eliminate accountability, and we're going to be confronted with this right now. So is it fair to test next spring? Is it fair? Hell yeah, it's fair. Because if you don't do it, these learning gaps are going to be unidentified, but they're going to be huge. And the pressure of making sure that children, that are particularly children lagging behind, they're just going to be cast aside. And I'd add another thing, which is we don't know when students are soaring either. There are a whole lot of students that could do much more if because they have the ability to do so, but the systems that we have in many places hold them back. So imagine a system where parents have more control, where students learn at their own pace, and we're given options to be able to maximize their God-given abilities, and we don't cast them aside. That is the vision, I think, of a 21st century education system that allows us to kick the Chinese butt.
Governor, I said this before, but a lot of people in this room consider you to be a mentor and a beacon and an inspiration. And we've all just been through a lot. Personally, any of us who are working in communities have, had an up-close and personal experience with deep, deep struggles that extend beyond education into the realms of healthcare and food security. And yet, there is this moment, as you're saying, to reimagine and to pursue this agenda. So what advice and kind of inspiring closing words do you have for all of us as we try to stay focused on the issues that matter to children?
Well, first of all, Romy, you're my mentor. So let's just get the record straight there. I thought my speech was supposed to answer that. I don't know, maybe it didn't.
Well,
but I would say, look.
We want to hear it again. That's sort of my point.
If you go.
Don't we?
If you look at history, we've had massive disruptions in our history. And normally, the great things, the great convergence of technology, great businesses, great ideas emerge in times of trauma, in times of disruption, not when things are going well. History is replete of examples of that. So I think the message is seize the moment. Convert this anger and angst and fear and all of these emotions that have developed because we think our political system in D.C. is broken, or we see the people that we used to respect, kind of the so-called experts, not really as experts as we thought they were. And all of this angst that builds up because of it, seize the moment to provide a hopeful, optimistic, tangible agenda to change the things that haven't changed, that need to change in the world that we're living in. I mean, we used to be the most dynamic country in the world, by far. and the envy of the world, and we still are for a lot of people. If you opened up all the doors of all the countries, I can promise you we would not have a net decrease in population. We'd be overwhelmed. So the American ideal is still alive, but we have to fix these things that worked really well in 1950, maybe in 1970, but have been in kind of slow, steady decline since then. That's the job of, I think, that's the cool part of being a public servant right now, or people that are helping public servants, is to seize this moment to fix the institutions that have been broken little by little, maybe not even discernible to the naked eye, but now we wake up and we see it. It's time to move. It's time to have a bias towards action again.
It's not going to be easy, and it's going to take working across lines of difference and being collaborative and following the evidence, but we're really thrilled to have you here to help us feel motivated as we head into 2022, and grateful for Excel and Ed in having such clear-eyed goals about what matters to students and families. So thank you so much for your leadership.
Thanks, Romy. Enjoy the conference.